everyone. What I wanted to do today was take you through how to deploy your code from GitHub using GitHub Actions to ECS. And well, I thought this would be a pretty easy thing to put together. I mean, how hard can it be? Get code deployed to ECS. And I wanted to create something that was easy for you to follow, something that you could use when you go back home. And as I started going through this, the instructions sort of appeared a little bit more like what this diagram looks like. So let's follow the white rabbit all the way down the hole and figure out how to do this step by step. What I'm going to recommend is that you don't take any notes as we go through this, because I've got all these slides and some sample code available online, and so you'll be able to use that. So just focus on what we're doing, and we're going to connect all of the different dots that it takes to go and make this thing real. And by the end of this presentation, we might know what this picture is going to be. Let's get started. So this is the deployment pipeline, and this has been extracted from a real application that I'm using myself. So my CI/CD pipeline has the tests, it then builds, tags, and deploys that image to ECR, and then deploys that to ECS. And so setting this up, I wanted to take advantage of OpenID Connect. OIDC, I always get those letters mixed up, is a way to give your GitHub account access to your AWS account without hard coding the secret key and your credentials. And so this is the way of doing it where you don't have long-lived credentials. The credentials are always rotated. And so in order for your GitHub to do all of the things that we want it to do in AWS, I put together sort of like, these are the things that we need it to do. There are 4 steps. So first off, we need to deploy the image to ECR. We need to read the current task definition and the service that is using it, make a new task definition, and then update that service. So they're the 4 things that we need to do. The first step is creating an identity provider in AWS. The name to use has to be tokens.actions.githubusercontent.com. Really simple to remember. That is the name that GitHub uses when it goes and accesses your AWS account, so otherwise known as the principal. And so what it's going to do is it's going to try and assume a role in your AWS account. And so in this case, I've named that role github-oidc-provider.aws. And you can see the federated name there is the same one that I just mentioned in that identity provider. And then if you don't include this condition here, you have given all of GitHub access to your AWS account. So include that condition there. Limit your access from GitHub to just your repository. Big important step right there. And so the role that we have, that will need some set of permissions. And remember, there's 4 things that we want to be able to do. So we can use a manage policy to do step number 1. But to cover steps 2, 3, and 4, we're going to need to write our own policy. And so if you don't like doing all of this through ClickOps within AWS, there is a Terraform provider that you can use that goes and makes all of these things happen for you. You just need to give it what your GitHub repo is. And if you want to, you can even restrict this to particular branches within your GitHub repository. We're going to use the managed AWS policy to cover number 1. And then we're going to define what that role is, or that policy is, for that second step. And so the main point is, like, what goes in that policy definition there? Because number 1, we've already got covered. So there's 3 statements that we're going to need to add into there. First one is being able to describe that existing task definition and go and make a new one by registering a new task definition. Easy enough, and that covers steps 2 and 3. To cover step 4, we need to be able to describe the existing service as well as update that existing service. And so here I'm limiting which service it is that is going to be able to update. But if you have multiple services that you want to update, you can just go and add them to this list. And so this covers number 4, almost. If you take a look at your task definition, there's a good chance that you'll have either a task role or an execution role that is running as part of your ECS task. These are the permissions that are needed by your application to go and talk to AWS services, or by the ECS agent to, in this case, log to CloudWatch. That's a set of permissions. And so you will need to have these 2 roles, or you'll probably have one or both of these roles in your task definition. So if we come back to our policy, this is where that 3rd statement comes in. We need to say that when we're updating that service and registering that new task definition, those execution role and task role, these are the roles that I'm going to be able to allow my service to go and assume. If you don't do that, your service will fail to deploy. And that takes care of all 4 of the steps. Hopefully I haven't lost anyone yet. We're still connecting all the dots. We're all still good? All right. One quick note is that your ECR repository will not need any additional permissions in there. You can just leave that blank. So now that we've got the AWS side covered, let's move on to the GitHub side. What I'm going to assume is that you know how to test and lint and scan your existing code, so I'm not going to cover there. The part that I am going to cover is just these second 2 steps, the building, tagging, and pushing of the image, as well as the deployment to ECS. If you haven't used GitHub Actions before, it's pretty simple. It's just a YAML file that you put in your .github/workflows directory. You can call it whatever you want. And within that YAML file, you want to specify a name and what triggers that action to run. In this case, it's coming off of the main branch whenever there's a branch open, or sorry, a commit to main, or a PR that is open on the main branch. And so you can see that I've got the test and the lint jobs there, but the one that we're going to focus on first is the making of the image. And so when you have a look at what goes into this, there is a lot of steps involved. And so again, like, let's break it down, connect the dots, and go through each one step by step. So the first thing is you want to define a name for that, tell it how it's going to run. And here I'm specifying the environment as production. This gives you the ability to go to your GitHub repository, and on the left-hand side, you will have a little section in there called deployments, and it will be an easy, quick way for you to go and see what is currently being deployed. The next step here is we're going to be saving some of the outputs to this, but the magic is really these 2 parts here. This is the part that says I'm giving GitHub access to my AWS account. So you need the permissions section there in order to give or tell it to use the OIDC provider that GitHub has. And then on the right is when you're actually getting the credentials. And the role that you're going to assume is the same role that you defined way back in the earlier slides. So those 2 names do need to match. But that's the only magic that you need. And once you've got that in place, then you are able to log into your ECR repository because the credentials are already been loaded into the environment for you. As we go through this, now we can check out our code. We can set up Docker and Docker layer caches. And I've included this here for you to have a reference for like how to do this, because it was pretty finicky to get Docker layer caching to happen inside of GitHub. But those are there. I want to call attention to what we're doing here, which is how we tag the images that we're uploading to ECR. I'm pretty particular about the way that my images are tagged. I know a lot of images that you use will just be :latest as the name, but latest doesn't communicate anything to me. And so I wrote a little script that will go through and figure out this naming convention in green here, how I want my images to be named. So if it's a PR, I want to know that it's a PR. Otherwise, tell me which branch it is, when it was created, the commit SHA that is there, and whether it was built on the CI/CD pipeline or whether I built this locally. And so that gives us the ability to, in our task definition, say not just app : latest, but it's app, it was the main branch, I built this in August, and you can see the commit SHA right there. And it was built using the CI pipeline. So that conveys a lot more information to me than just latest. So now that we have calculated the images, we can then push that image up to ECR. And so here we're using the output from the previous commands. The way output reuse happens within GitHub Actions is a little clunky, but there's an example of how that happens. So I'm referencing the full tag step on the left, using the outputs of that, and it's the image part that I am using because that's what I pushed to GitHub output. So once you have pushed that up, what I like to do is actually post to Slack, what is that image that has just been created? And that gives me the ability to then have a little notification in Slack that says which image has been built. And it's very clear what has been happening, and I can click the link to that and go off to my GitHub repository. And that's it for the building of the image. Well, we can move on to the deployment side. Again, there's a lot of steps here, and this case, I said this is extracted from a real live application. This is doing 2 services. We're just going to go down to the main deploy step here, and if you go and follow this code that is online, you too will have these warning messages. You can ignore all of them. They don't matter. What that's basically saying is that you're taking an existing task definition and you're making modifications to that, but that task definition also has a bunch of variables in it that won't make sense or are just going to be completely ignored when you deploy the new task definition. And so these warnings are just reflecting that. So back to GitHub Actions, we're going to define the deploy step. I will note that the concurrency is also production here. If you merge multiple things to your main branch, you don't want multiple deploys happening simultaneously. You only want one deploy happening at a time. And so concurrency production means that there's only one deploy happening for that environment at one time. And then otherwise, it's the exact same magic that we used last time, where we're defining the permissions and configuring the AWS credentials. And then the deploy step, AWS has provided GitHub Actions that you can reuse. And so what we're going to use here is describing the current task definition and downloading that, and then using their GitHub action to make a modification to that. And so what we're going to be doing is taking our existing task definition, the one that looks something like this, we're going to be telling the action to use this name, like the name of the container that we want to modify, and then the image that is going to be put into place there. And so that's how that deployment pieces all come together. And then the next step is to actually modify the existing service. And so here is where we go from just the raw deployment. You're specifying which cluster, which service you want to deploy that to, and using the output from the previous job as the task definition. And so that worker will wait for that service to become available. And it will wait, in this case, for up to 10 minutes for that to become available. So this job won't actually finish until your ECS cluster has been completely updated and everything is running properly. So you don't have to create your own poller to monitor the status of this, it's going to do that for you. Which means that if this one fails, you can catch that failure in your GitHub action and fail the entire job or replay pieces of that. But that's how that whole pipeline sort of works. And so if we put it all together, we've got our full deployment pipeline. We're building the image, we're pushing it up to ECR, and we're deploying it to ECS. And look, it's a fish. Who would have guessed? If you have this running for a while, one of the things that you will probably run into is a bunch of images getting created in your ECR repository. So I would recommend that you create some lifecycle rules to go and clean out the older images. And so a couple of things that I've got set up here, I'm only keeping the main image for 20 days, and any PRs, I'm going to remove those relatively quickly. So that's all that I had for today. I wanted to give you the slides and the code that I've used for this. The code will not run out of the box because it was for my account. You need to change it to work with your AWS account. But if you run into any issues, just open a issue on GitHub, and we'll figure out how to make that work for you. And now you get to sit through my infomercial. I run Answers for AWS, which is a site that tracks which AWS services are popular and which ones are trending up and down. So I would recommend that you participate in that survey that comes out in January, February timeframe. And then I also run the Advanced AWS meetup in San Francisco. So for those of you who had to drive a lot to get to Southern California here, back up in San Francisco, we have our own meetup. And the next one is on October 17. It'll be in the Mission District. And we are always looking for additional speakers, sponsors, places to host. So please come and join our meetup if you're up that side. Otherwise, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Pete. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? No? All right. What was it? Yeah.
I connected all the dots.
Yeah, I knew it was a fish like halfway through. Yeah.
Thanks for keeping it down.
Yeah, I kept it quiet. OK, if that's the case, then there is a raffle, right? Here, drawing something. Yeah, so there's a raffle here at 3:55. So we're going to wait, and it's like 5-6 minutes. So we're going to wait for the other rooms to finish their talks, and then we're going to have the raffle in here. So stick around, and that should be fun. And somebody will win a, what are they going to win? What are we raffling? We don't know yet?
We do know. We only have...
It's a secret?
No, it's an Amazon Echo Dot and 5 T-shirts.
OK, so there you go. 5 T-shirts and an Echo Dot. So stick around and find out if you won. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Pete.